Okay, everyone, I thought I would just put together a video as a review for Airspace and just to continue to expand on what you've learned in the modules in the online course, all that kind of good stuff. So, as we've learned, uh, different classes of airspace, they all have those wonderful letters, class A, B, C, D, E, and G. And if you've noticed, there is no F. Um, Long story on that one, but yes, there is no class F airspace. They skipped it. So anyway, the only airspace that we can fly in without authorization is class G, of course. And we'll just go through the alphabet. So I'm just going to go over the airspace just real quick, and then we're going to start looking at the aeronautical charts because that's where people have difficulty. It's applying the airspace. Everybody can memorize this chart, but when it's time to actually go out and fly and figure out where you can fly and where you can't, that's where it gets a little bit trickier. So Class A airspace, starting at the top, think Class A airlines. So airlines operating between 18,000 and on this picture it says FL. Let's see my cursor here. FL 600. That means 60,000 feet. So actually above 18,000 they start calling them flight levels and they drop some zeros off. Aviation is a little lazy. They start dropping zeros pretty easy on things. So anyway, Class A airspace, 18,000 to 60,000 feet. Now, most of you are probably not going to be flying your Mavic Airs at above 18,000 feet, so not to worry. We are not allowed to fly there no matter what. Even you can't even get authorization if you could get that high or whatever. So no flying in Class A. It's just more of just understanding that it's there. All right. Now the next classes of airspace. Just real quickly, the Class B airspace is what we get to next. Now think Class B busy. B for busy airports like international type airports like Detroit, Chicago, Minneapolis. Those are going to be Class B airports. Those are all around airports, the busy airports. And if you notice on this picture, we call it the upside down wedding cake philosophy. So this airspace is like an upside down wedding cake. So you can fly beneath Class B airspace, but just not in it. So again, as we go forward and look at the charts, just remember this upside down wedding cake. And then the next one we get to is Class C airspace, which is like a mini Class B airspace. So Class C airspace still has a control tower at the airport. It's a smaller cake. It's a smaller upside down wedding cake. So typically just two layers, the inner and the outer layer. Again, you can fly under the Class C airspace, but not in it. Sometimes as a memory aid, we say C for congested. I don't know. It's typically like Grand Rapids and Lansing are going to be Class C, just to kind of give you an idea. And then we go down to Class D. And this is like Traverse City. So Class D airspace, it is not an upside down wedding cake. We have, I always say it's more like a soup can. So there's no way to fly under it. You're either in it or you're not. And typically this airspace, it's about 5 miles radius, so about 5 miles away, and up to about 2,500 feet above the ground. So you're not going to fly over it. So most of these, you're not going to fly over them anyway, just because you're going to be well above your 400-foot limitations. So again, control towered airports. So easy thing to remember. Don't even worry about Class A for the most part. But Class B, C, and D airports will have a control tower. Some of the other airports do not. Like you should have already learned, there's uncontrolled and controlled airports. Not all airports have a control tower. So that the B, C, and D airspace is pretty straightforward. Where it can start to get more confusing is the Class E and down near the surface, Class G. And if you remember from your regulations, Class G airspace is the only airspace that we can fly in without authorization. So anywhere else we can't. Now a good thing is most places is Class G airspace close to the ground, below 1,200 feet, or below 700 feet. Is Class G airspace. It is considered uncontrolled airspace. So there is not an air traffic control agency monitoring that airspace. It's just too close to the ground, all that kind of good stuff. So up here, Class E is still considered controlled airspace. So there is, even though you're flying around way up here or down here flying around, in manned aviation terms, there's an air traffic control facility that technically still has jurisdiction over that airspace, and it's considered controlled airspace. When we look at some non-towered airports, some of them can be in Class G, and some of them might be in Class E. And we'll get to that a little bit more, because this part can get really confusing. So, I hope everybody has a good grasp of just that basic outline, the A, B, C, D, and where you would possibly find it. And we will go on to looking at aeronautical charts. They're called sectional charts. Really, when we're talking about airspace, you can look at a diagram like this, but it's really not going to do you a lot of good until you start looking at a map to figure out where it's at. So we'll do that right now. All right, the one place that I recommend going is a website called skyvector.com. So just type it into your browser, and if you go to the website skyvector.com, it's a great place to basically get all the sectional charts of the whole entire United States, and it's great practice. So before I fly someplace, if I get a job, this is one of the websites I go to actually really determine if I'm okay to fly or not. This is what all pilots learn, and you guys are pilots, so you get to learn aeronautical charts, and that's what this is. So if you go to skyvector.com, you can basically get the maps of the whole United States. So it's good practice. So let me scroll down here just a little bit. So we're going to run through the airspace real quick, going through the letters again. So where is Class A airspace? It's above 18,000 feet, 18,000 to 60,000. So we don't have to worry about it. We can't fly there. We can't even get authorization to fly there. Going down the list, now we go to Class B airspace, and B for busy or big airports. So if we look at Detroit, I'll zoom in here just a little bit. This is the Class B airspace. It is these blue lines surrounding Detroit. Now remember, the upside down wedding cake philosophy. You have to think in 3 dimensions. You're not used to that. You're used to just looking at a Google Earth map and it's all flat. Now we're adding that 3rd dimension of height as well. So this is the airport itself. Can zoom in a little bit more. There's Detroit Metro right there. There's the runways. So all these blue lines are the different layers of the cake. And how do I know what altitude they'll start at? Because remember, we can fly below it. We just can't fly in it. So if you look at these numbers, there's 100 over 60, 100 over 90, 100 over 40. That is the altitude. So and I mentioned earlier that aviation, they like to drop zeros off because we're lazy. So that is 10,000 feet, and that is 4,000 feet. So the Class B right here, it starts at 10,000 feet, and it goes down to 4,000 feet. And that's actually above sea level, not above the ground, but above sea level. So the whole top of this Class B airspace is at 10,000 feet. Not that we care that much as drone pilots, because we're typically not going over 400. But when we look at these layers, I can fly underneath these layers. So if I was out on a boat right here, I would be okay to fly, because from the surface up to 400 feet is actually just Class G airspace. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But the Class B, since we're talking about that, really doesn't start till 4,000 feet. So I'm not in it. Same thing with right here. Sometimes you have to look around a little bit. So this is 10,000 to 3,000. So the Class B starts at 3,000 feet. So if I was buzzing around right here where my mouse cursor is, I would be okay. As I move in, again, sometimes you have to kind of follow the layer around a little bit. Right here, the Class B starts at 2,500 feet. So if I was doing an inspection along here, I would still be okay, assuming I was 400 feet or less, because I'm not above 2,500. But now, as soon as I cross this line, I can no longer do it. Right here, this FSC means that it starts at the surface. So from the surface to 10,000 feet, right there, that's the center of the cake. So you cannot fly in there without authorization. So this is a place where you'd be splitting hairs. So if you were doing an inspection or a job, you could actually, and again, this is where my mouse pointer is, you could actually do it here, but as soon as you cross that line, no, you can't. Just a quick little thing about the yellow here. That is congested area, not congested airspace, but a congested area, as in like it's a city, densely populated. So you would have to be careful of that. Not saying you couldn't fly there because of that, but there'd be a lot of houses and buildings and that kind of stuff. And you have to deal with that. Okay, so in a nutshell, that is Class B airspace. As we continue down the alphabet, so now the next thing we get to is C airspace. And that's what this looks like, these little magenta targets. So this color in aviation is called magenta. And in this case, the layer of the cake only has 2 layers, which makes it a little easier. And the nice thing about Class C airspace is that typically it is nice and round, where when you look at Class B, it's kind of all discombobulated and they chop it up and they kind of make it fit the terrain and everything that's around it. But Class C tends to be pretty uniform. They tend to make it nice and just circular. So anyway, so here's our airport. There's the runways. Right here, surface to 4,900 feet. So it's not as tall, smaller. Not that we're going to go over it. And then, more importantly, we can get in a little closer here. Right here, 21 to 49, 2,100 feet to 4,900 feet. So again, upside down wedding cake. It's okay that I fly here, but as soon as I cross that line, now the Class C extends all the way to the surface, and I would have to get authorization to fly in here. One thing I should back up a little bit with these aeronautical charts. Whenever you see a blue airport, it means it has a control tower. So it is going to be either Class B, Class C, or Class D airspace. Those are the ones that have the control towers. So even if we zip right on over here, what type of airspace is this? Class C. Here's our control towered airport. Here's our altitudes, 2,000 feet. Here it starts at the surface. I could fly here, assuming I was close to the ground, less than 400 feet, but I can't fly here. All right, so continuing to move on, I realize it can be a little tricky listening to somebody just chatting about maps for long periods of time. So let's take a look at Traverse City. Traverse City happens to be a Class D airport. Blue airport means it has a control tower. And here, this blue dashed line is the Class D airspace. Don't pay attention to this big compass rose looking thing out here. That is not airspace. That's actually a radio navigation aid that's centered right there. We as drone pilots don't care about those. Those are for radio. They're for airplanes for radio navigation. They follow these little Victor Airways, they're called. They're like highways in the sky. and they center on these radio navigation aids. They're called VORs. Anyway, blue lines, Class D airspace. We cannot fly in there without authorization. This goes straight to the surface, up to 3,100 feet. That's what this little 31 is. They write it a little bit differently for Class D. They don't put the SFC like they do in the other ones. It's just assumed that you understand that it's from the surface to 3,100 feet. We're not going to fly over it. We just can't be in it. So interesting thing, if you wanted to take a look at these Spider Lakes, and maybe you have a video shoot you want to do there, these lakes, you're fine. But as soon as you cross that little dash blue line, you would now need authorization. Okay. Those are actually pretty straightforward. When we start getting into Class E and G airspace, it gets a little bit more tricky. And you kind of have to train your eyes for it. So what I'm going to do is zoom out a little bit and go all the way up north. And let me zoom in. And this blue shading, and see how it shades this way? And we actually have some more here shading in this direction. Now remember, Class E airspace is still considered controlled airspace. Class G is not. Class G is typically always found near the surface. Well, this blue shading that goes this direction, and it keeps going actually. There is no end in sight actually. This means that Class E airspace starts at 1,200 feet above the ground. The blue shading does. And really this blue shading, it pretty much extends all the way across the United States. So wherever you're looking and you don't see blue shading, it's kind of like it's there, because it starts up here and it goes right across the country. So without even looking that hard for it, I know that Class E airspace starts at 1,200 feet here. It's almost like because I don't see it, therefore I know it's there, if that makes any sense whatsoever. The other thing is I'm starting to notice these magenta circles, and notice how this shading goes this way. Some of these some airports, you're going to see this around. And what it is, well, our Class E, 1,200 feet and above. Now, as I get here, it just simply drops down to 700 feet. So, and the interesting thing is, when you see these magenta rings, in many ways, as a drone operator, where normally we are flying 400 feet or below, the fact that Class E starts at 1,200 feet here and starts at 700 feet here, it really almost kind of doesn't matter to me as a drone operator at 400 feet. So if I'm cruising across this line at 400 feet above the ground, it just doesn't matter because it's way up here at 1,200 feet, it's way up here at 700 feet. And again, that's where the controlled airspace starts, at either 1,200 feet and above or 700 and above. So below that is going to be Class G airspace. So looking at this airport, so if we were flying in this area, the one thing to note, so this is a magenta airport. That means it does not have a control tower. It is in Class G airspace, which is uncontrolled airspace. The regulations say that we can fly in Class G airspace, uncontrolled airspace. That's what this is. So technically, as a commercial operator, you could fly right here. Now, as a hobbyist, they want you to stay 5 miles away from an airport. As a commercial operator, there are some airports, like this one, these uncontrolled airports in Class G airspace. Technically, there's nothing stopping you from, legally from coming out and flying right off the end of the runway, as goofy as that sounds. Now, would you want to do that? No. You probably want to be talking to somebody, maybe use the common traffic advisory frequency with this little C and listen on the radio, maybe talk on the radio. But that's the reason why, as a commercial operator, you get to learn all those fun things like runway signs and runway markings and what airplanes do at a airport, all that kind of stuff, is because you're trained to operate in that environment. So that is why you guys get to learn all that fun stuff. So anyway, so I'm hoping that's kind of straightforward. So 1,200 feet with the Class E airspace, dropping down to 700 feet straight across here. So below all that Class E airspace is uncontrolled Class G. Now, when we start getting over here, it starts to add, there's a little bit more to the story. 1,200 feet Class E drops down to 700. Now, this dashed magenta line is what they call a Class E surface area. That drops Class E all the way to the surface. Guess what? Can we fly in Class E airspace? No, we cannot, unless we have authorization, of course. So interestingly enough, let's say this is a railway right here. Maybe you're doing a rail line inspection. So you're in class, and assuming, again, you're below 400 feet, you're flying along, and right here you would have to stop. You would have to get authorization to enter that spot. Now, what's confusing about it, what type of airport is this? Is it a controlled airport or uncontrolled? In other words, is there a control tower there? It is an uncontrolled airport. There is not a control tower there, but it's in controlled airspace. That's what hangs people up. So just because the airport does not have a control tower doesn't mean that it's not in controlled airspace. So there's still an air traffic control facility that has jurisdiction over this airport. It's just that there's not a tower there. I'm hoping that that makes sense to people. So controlled airspace, Class E airspace, but no control tower. Kind of crazy. Okay, so that's a quick rundown of the different airspaces. And I know you probably don't really want to do this, but if you feel that it's still not making a ton of sense, run back through the video a bit. And then also I'm making another video on problems.